What you'll notice when you look at your material, the black fabric that I gave you is really, really big. It's a lot bigger than your actual, like what you've made. The reason behind that is because some people had different size measurements of how their quilt came out. And so it was just easier for me to give you a bigger piece of fabric and to not, worry about which one you needed to get and what size was going to work. You can just cut this up and it'll be fine. What I want you to notice, because this is kind of important or something to know. If you have the material, if you have it in front of you, it's very, very different. It's a material that I specifically hunted to find and I bought for us. Because what you'll notice when you look at this one, so we have this stuff. Now I cut these edges. Let's see, where are some? Oh, here we go. You know me and my cutting skills. So I cut these up. It was a big, big, giant roll of fabric. And I cut these up for us. And what do you notice that's happening to my regular fabric that I cut, but isn't happening to this black fabric? Let me do a side-by-side comparison. So what's happening with my quilt fabric that you don't notice with the black fabric? What do you notice? So what you'll notice is even though, we cut as best we can, even though my cuts are a little choppy, this isn't happening. These little hairs that start to come apart with our fabric, these little pieces of the fabric, it doesn't happen. And this is why. This is not actually fabric, it's plastic. So what I bought for us is a special type of material. They do use it in clothing and they actually use it in straws. I know, way to go science. It's called polypropylene. So what this means is it's very durable. When they use it in clothing, it's because it's breathable. It tends to be used in cold weather clothing, not in warm weather clothing because this melts. It's plastic. So yesterday I talked about you guys kind of ironing down these little tabs. If you didn't, and you start attaching this new fabric to it, you can't iron anymore. Like even the lowest setting on your iron, this black fabric will start to melt. It's a different type of plastic. It's non-woven. So basically they get the plastic, they melt it down into a shape, they put it into this kind of like a mold, really. And then they create sheets for us. If you guys garden, this might look familiar. This is what people put at the bottom of their gardening. So they'll put this, then they put the dirt, and then they put the tomatoes. So it's a little bit different. But for us, this is perfect because when we have our pencil case, this fabric is going to be the border. And what was a challenge with normal fabric, and the reason why I picked this for us, is because it doesn't fray. It doesn't come apart. Even when you cut it, you won't have to worry about this happening, these little pieces, with the final result. So that's why I bought this one. Your first step, and again, you might be following along with me. You might just want to see what I'm going to do, and then you're going to do it after. That's totally fine. Your first step is just to cut your fabric. So that way it's the size that you need. Again, it might be a lot bigger. And so you can just throw, those extra pieces away. This will be seen. What's going to happen is this fabric is going to be the back of the inside of your pencil case. And we're going to fold it over to be the border. It's going to be the border of the quilt. For those of you that are sticklers for details, like for me, I really wanted straight edges. And that's very hard for me. It's hard for me to cut without having a line. Like you guys remember when we were attaching this, I was drawing lines all over the place. That's just how I am. Luckily, if we look at this example, You'll notice with this one, it's not cut as straight. And even though it's not a perfect cut, it's not as noticeable, so that this fabric's pretty forgiving of not really noticing if your cut is slightly lopsided. If you wanted to do, I guess you would say a textured cut, like let's say instead of having a straight line for the border, maybe you want to do scallops. So those are their little like wave looking ones. You can try, but remember, this is the only piece you get. I just like straight edges. You know, the quilt is very like straight edge kind of lines. So my tip for you, when you go to cut, because what nice thing about this is that because it's a plastic type of fabric, you can draw on it. Pencil works really well. When I get started, I usually kind of find a side that looks pretty straight. All of you should have at least one spot that's pretty straight. And I kind of use that as my guiding line. And then I'll kind of put my quilt to the corners, like to that kind of like angled corner. The amount that we're going to fold over is really just a finger's width. Remember, when we were adding the rows, what I talked about is that our tops, our sides, and our bottoms, they're a lot bigger, right? Like just in size-wise compared to the rest of our squares. So the border actually camouflages that height. So we're going to do just about a finger's width. And that's kind of what you're measuring. You're kind of just like going to the side, and you're just going to see, okay, if I fold this over, I want about a finger's width, roughly that size. So I get that where I want to be. I kind of make a mark. Don't forget it's going to be folded. And this one's a little bit harder to see, you know, just because of the black. I can see it because the pencil shininess is there. It might be a little hard for you guys to see on the camera. I kind of give myself a bit of a line. And then I'll use something that has a straight edge. Because again, I don't trust myself to draw a straight edge. And if you don't have a ruler at home, you know, I gave you the paper ruler, but it's slightly flimsy. This will help me kind of guide that line. So you're going to trim this down. And again, I'll have all these steps up so you guys remember what to do next. But like the magic of cooking TV shows, I have one pre-cut. Ta-da! I know. It's amazing. So here's my piece. I have my backing. I have my quilt. So our patchwork quilt, again, we're just going to size it. And what I do, because this is going to be, as with every time we sew, your fabric wants to shift on you. It wants to move. It wants to move around. So what we have to do is kind of tack it in place. And this is what we did for our rows as well when we were building them. So what we're going to do is get our paper clips, our bobby pins, whatever you guys have that's going to hold the fabric. And you're just going to start on one side. You know, you don't have to tack the whole entire piece. You just have to start on one side. And what you'll notice, and a lot of you have this as well, I have pieces of fabric that are a lot longer than some of my other pieces. Like they're just cut a little bit larger. I have these little, what would be the English equivalent of picos? Points. I have these little points because I did my diagonal. This is going to hide that. It's going to hide all those oddities. But I need to make sure I have it so that way it stays. Like it's not going to be moving around while I'm trying to sew. I'm just kind of gauging, you know, checking and seeing. I'm going to fold that black fabric. I'm not losing any fabric on this side. For me, it's always easiest to start in the middle, just like our rows. Once I kind of get the middle to stay, to hold, then I can kind of start working on the edges, getting those straight. I'm gonna like tuck some of this extra fabric under. That way it's not so in the way of my black fabric. If we were doing a traditional quilt, because again, we're not doing a traditional one. One, resources, two, time. You guys would probably murder me if we made a large quilt. But traditional quilt, when they do the border, one, they use normal fabric. They don't use the fabric that we're going to use, but they also double it up, which means is they'll roll it once, like really, really skinny, and then they'll roll it again. And again, because they're using normal fabric and we're using this plastic, what is this called? Polypropylene. We don't have to worry about the edges. We don't have to worry that it's going to fray, whereas quilters do. Normal fabric does fray. So there's my edge. I'm going to do a couple stitches, but before I do that, let's think about this. This is going to be our pencil case. It's starting to come into shape. It's starting to become what it's going to be in the end. For our whole quilt, when we were sewing our squares together, when we were sewing the rows together, no one sees all this madness. No one sees this chaos in the back because we're going to have this fabric. It's going to be nice and clean. It's all pretty in the end. No one sees it. It's hidden, right? Now that we're going to sew the border on, we have to be very mindful of our stitches. Everyone's going to see those. Everyone's going to see them. Like if you look at my little example here, as best you can. Because again, this is the first time we're making this. This is the first time you guys have done a sewing assignment. As best you can, I want you to really take your time and just be very mindful of your stitches, how they look, how do you want them to look. Go slow. I know when we get into the rhythm of sewing, it gets very fast and it's very easy. And some of our stitches look a little wonky. Like mine, I always tend to do straight and then these like weird sideways ones. Take your time. I'm giving you time. I want you to take your time and just be mindful of your stitches. How spaced are they? How far apart, that kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to do just a little bit because you guys already know how to do the stitching. You already know how to do the stitching. You know how to do the ugly fly knot. Now it's just a matter of the technical stuff, like the things I want you to know as you start adding your own backing. Every time we sew, we have our thread. Again, an arm's length is I would say no longer than an arm's length. And we have our ugly fly knot. Now it's called an ugly fly knot because it is ugly. We don't want this to show. For adding the backing, I like to put it between, right underneath the border and right on top of the fabric, only because this is going to be a pencil case. So if I had a million ugly fly knots inside a bag that I'm supposed to use, like a pencil could get stuck on it. It could rip it. Let's say you have scissors inside there. It could take it apart. So I try to put the knot in between the layers only because I don't want to worry about it with what I'm going to put in the bag. So yes, that's a good way to start. I'm going to start here. And the only reason I'm starting just some random spot in the middle is because I want to get to the corner to show you what to do at the corners. Because you guys know, you already know how to stitch. We've been stitching for a while, but the corner is going to be something that you have to kind of plan before you stitch all the way up. And then also, So here I am. Again, I'm starting here just because I want to get to the corner pretty quickly. I'm starting my needle in between. So here's my border. My needle is just going to go right in the back because when I pull it through, there's that ugly fly knot and no one will see it. No one will see it. None of our pencils will get stuck to it. Sometimes my little tail is really, really long. So what I'll do is I'll pull it through and then I kind of just with my finger, just kind of tuck it into the side. So that way, when I go and I lay this down, it's not peeking out. It's not this little like loop that you can see. It's kind of hidden still. Now, again, being mindful of my running stitch, I'm just going to go in. And it's really up to you. I always try to go in the middle of the border. Some of you might want to go to the edge. The only caution I give, don't go too close to the fold because we got to grab some of this fabric. You know, I don't want you making your pencil case and then this little piece, because we went too close, starts to like come out or makes a hole. So in the middle, closer to the edge, all of those work. Again, be cautious of the edge. You go too close, it might, pull out. But at this point, we get to possibly use our newest, our greatest tool. Don't forget to pick it up if you go and pick up the fabric. Our water balloons. Yay, water balloons. I hope you didn't fill them with water and throw them at your siblings. We need them for this part. We have about 2 layers, right? We have the backing, we have our quilt. Depending on how you made your patchwork quilt, you might have even more, like especially in these corners where I have like just this chunk of fabric. It's gonna get a little hard to pull the needle out. It's just gonna get very, very difficult to pull that needle out. What I found in my years of sewing is that thimbles can be expensive and water balloons are very cheap. And it's the same concept. For some reason, the friction of the plastic in a water balloon with the needle helps you pull it out. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'm sewing, again, mindful of my stitches. I want them to be as neat as I can. And even pushing it through is a little tough. It gets a little stuck. So I'm going to push it through the eye of the needle, the thickest part, especially with our needles. I'm going to wrap the water balloon around the needle, kind of just using it to hold the needle and pull it through. Some people, I gave you guys 2 because some people like to actually put the water balloons on their fingers to help pull the needle through. It doesn't matter. It's up to you, really. Sometimes you might need it. Sometimes you might not. It's just there in case. I didn't want you guys struggling with putting this backing on because you can't pull the needle through. I'm coming up to my first holder, I guess you would say, my little bobby pin. I'm just going to push it out because I want to keep sewing. And you're always going to run into those knots. So just, take your time. We're not rushing this. We're going to be putting this backing on today, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday. I really want you to take your time. So that way this looks very neat. Everyone's going to see this part. We want to take our time and just do it neatly. When you get to the corner, you want to leave, and this is just, and I'll show you right now. You want to stop your stitches about a finger's width away from the end because we got to do a fold. And this is where you're going to need the clip that you just took off. You're going to need it again. So again, I'm checking the rest of my quilt, making sure it's not, gone wonky while I was sewing, making sure it's still lined up. Here, where my stitches are coming. Now they're kind of getting to that corner spot. At this point, I'm going to fold this over, right? Because this is our border. And I'm just going to check, like, okay, I want to make sure I'm having this little tail. It's trying to fight me. I'm just going to tuck that underneath, get that out of the way, start folding my fabric. And this time, I really just care about the corner. I'm not going to start in the middle, not yet. I just want to get to the corner and to see. Because what I care about is that, let me zoom in. This is going to want to happen. This where the fabric is just kind of, as you fold, it wants to flare out. I just want to make sure that I'm really just tucking that fabric in. I want to give a crisp edge. And this is a little bit hard to see, even when I zoom in. I have my first border. Again, this top part is going to fold down because that's the border. And I want to try to line up this edge to down here where it's going to fold. So I kind of just like put my finger there, kind of guide it, you know, as best I can. And this is where this next clip or paper clip, bobby pin, if you don't have either, tape, you know, tape can work as well. I'm just going to slide that so it holds it. So here's that little fold. Here's my like next one that I'm going to start. Because what you'll notice, and I'll show you my completed one. And what's kind of nice about this fabric too, the edges, it has a bit of a texture. So that's nice because it camouflages some of the excess. You know, you don't see it as much. But when I go to do my next stitch, and this is probably where you're going to really need the water balloons, I'm going through 4 pieces of fabric now. It's going to be pretty thick. And I want that edge, I want that design to match as best I can. So you'll see right here, this stitch a lot longer than my other stitches. As I started getting, you know, like a little bit better, you know, you want that consistency to happen, but you got to kind of plan it before you start it. So I'm here at the corner. I have this stitch that I just finished down here. So my next stitch would go a little bit above there. Not too far away. I'm going to get my water balloon to help me pull this needle through. And again, I'm just using the water balloon to help the needle, because you might be strong enough to pull that needle all the way through. It gets so slippery for me. And the rubber of the water balloon just really helps get a grip, pretty much. You'll pull it through. And then I'm going to do one more stitch going straight. Ooh, those layers. Yeah, watch out for your finger behind, by the way. Be careful. And now I'm going to start thinking about, okay, I want to start to kind of turn that stitch. This is when I'll go back again. I'll get my clips. Now I'm going to start getting this border ready because I want it to be straight. And I want to just keep stitching. I don't want to stop. So let's pretend I already did those. PS, bobby pins are nice because they slide out of your fabric very easily. Paper clips tend to get stuck a little bit. And so I'll just get these sides ready. Again, if you have fabric that's, you know, bigger, if you have fabric that is larger, like you can see on this side row, not too bad, really, really big. Like this fabric is big. So I don't mind just doing something like this, like pushing that fabric down when I get here. And then doing my border, whichever works for you. You're going to kind of, you know, slowly go through. So I'll start getting these guys ready. And then I start that turn. Now I'm going to be very carefully. Even pushing it through sometimes is hard. So the water balloon gives you grip on the needle. If you have thimbles at home, you can try that too, but this is a cheap and resourceful way that I've learned as a teacher to get you guys to be able to do this easily. And then you just continue on. Keep going, keep going. Again, you guys know how to do the running stitch. This isn't new. What you're going to be focusing on now is the border. Getting the border cut to size. And then as you start to sew, because I'm going to run out of thread. Like always, we're always going to run out of thread. We're going to have to start and stop. Even if you got 6 feet of thread, you would have knots. Ugh, your knots would be horrible. Same thing. So let me do one more stitch and I'll show you how you should stop. Okay, so let's pretend that I ran out of thread. Now for me right now, we're gonna do the same type of knot that ends, whenever we finish sewing, we do that, whatever side we come out of, we find that next stitch. You can do it on the back because it's a very small knot. Let me show you. Here's my sample pencil case. This is exactly how we've done it before. You go in and you find that stitch, the last stitch that we did. Here's my thread. So I'm gonna end just like before. Look for the last stitch, wherever my thread's coming out. Slide underneath. You have to be careful with this fabric because it wants to grab your needle too. Here's my loop. Needle goes through the loop. I pull tightly one more time underneath. Here's my loop. Needle through the loop. And we pull, pull, pull. Again, don't cut too close to the knot. You don't want to make a knot and then have it come undone. Like that's going to drive you crazy. And that's what you're going to do. You're going to slowly just work your way around. So when I start again, you're always thinking about keeping it as consistent as possible. So let's say I got my new thread, pretend. My next stitch should be about here. So I'm going to go in between the layers, inside. I'm going to kind of look and see, okay, my stitch should be about right there. Too low. My ugly fly knot is now in between. I kind of push it down just so that way it's a little bit more hidden. Like those little loops are hidden. And then you start again, just like normal.